Welcome to the SWIKE podcast, the only podcast that shares the stuff you didn't know you needed to know about jobs, careers, and life. The SWIKE podcast, the stuff I wish I knew earlier.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the SWIKE Stuff I Wish I Knew Earlier, the podcast. We have here another guest host, Ellie, who's going to give us a little bit of her background. And she comes to us as a biology grad who is, wants to share a little bit of her career path. I don't want to spoil too much, but if you can tell us a little bit about what you're doing now, and then we'll get into a little bit about your background so that folks can get an understanding of your path and your career journey.
Certainly. Thanks very much, Luki. So my name is Ellie. Right now, I work at a company called GlaxoSmithKline. I'll call it GSK for the rest of this conversation. And what I do there, or rather, GSK is a company that makes medicines. And what I do there is I work in a department called Regulatory Affairs. So I'm currently a Regulatory Affairs Associate at GSK, and I'm also completing my Master's in Biotechnology at the University of Toronto, Mississauga. And immediately prior to that, I also finished my Bachelor in Science in Molecular Biology at U of T Scarborough campus. So that's me in 20 seconds. Luki, looking forward for you to grill me more.
No, that's amazing. And what I like to do is find a little bit more about you. So have the audience kind of relate to your background. So this is probably more geared towards the biology folks, right? So those in kind of high school or earlier that are contemplating that route. So would love to know a little bit about you as a kid. Like, were you always interested in bio, or did you have other interests? And how did you end up kind of picking the school that you went to, the program? And what was kind of the journey up until like the workforce, and then where you are right now?
Certainly, that's a great question. So I can say that the way that I was brought up definitely influenced my decision to end up at U of T. First and foremost, I always knew that when I was growing up, I knew that university was the pathway for me. Not necessarily because I understood what university entailed, but because my father had went to university and my grandfather had also went to university. So it was definitely ingrained into me that this is what you do. You go to high school and then you go to university.
Education is the path, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And I definitely do have some thoughts on that, thinking back, but that was the path that I knew. And then to get a little bit more specific about it, when I was growing up, my father was definitely really, really interested in nature and spending time outdoors. And he also has a biology degree. So I definitely can see a lot of influence thinking back to it where I was a kid. He would teach me about things in nature outside. We would go hiking a lot. And that definitely taught me to appreciate and see the natural world around me. Now, going into high school is when we had to start thinking about what university we're going to go to and what we might major in. And again, I had this idea ingrained into me that the natural path was to go into university and then do your bachelor's degree and then do your master's degree and then do your PhD.
Okay.
So I was always on this path where I think I kind of had an idea about what I should be doing, what I ought to be doing. I don't think I took enough time to stop and think about why I was going on this path,
Right.
but I knew that this is the path that seemed like the natural choice for me. In terms of choosing which university to go to, I definitely had a time when I was, 16, 17, 18, where I wanted the university experience. I wanted to go to parties and try doing illegal things at parties and, living with my friends and making new friends. But I ended up staying in Scarborough at my parents' house and going to University of Toronto Scarborough because it was way cheaper to live at home. So a big part of my decision was definitely spurred by the finances there. And the other aspect is that U of T Scarborough is one of the universities that offers a co-op program.
Right.
And having been a teenager and having some work experience already as a teen made me really, really appreciative of how valuable those skills are that you gain in the workplace. I definitely wanted to go to a university that had a co-op program. So it was definitely a combination of growing up and knowing that university was the path, again, debatable, and then wanting to stay home and save money, and then also valuing the co-op experience, which is what made me go to U of T and begin to study biology.
So what was the thought process? So if I was like a grade 12 and thinking of that path, how do I go about, or how did you go about choosing school? So one, there's a proximity location type of thing. There was the co-op part of it. So that narrowed the field a little bit. And then you went into like a specific type, like molecular biology. I don't know how diverse biology is, but there's a whole bunch of them. Like, is that something you pick later on, or do you have to like enroll in that there? So how do you help, if you can help someone kind of in that process? Okay, they might be in your headspace thinking about a place to go to, one of the schools to choose. Like, what are some of the factors that went into your decision?
That's an excellent question. So at U of T, luckily, there's a little bit less pressure about your major because you don't have to pick your major or your specialist. In my case, you don't have to pick that until the end of your first year.
Okay.
Um, everyone enters in a general bucket, like if you wanted to enter the arts or the life sciences or management or maths, maybe you enter into that general bucket, but you don't pick the specific type of biology or what have you until the end of first year.
Okay.
Um, what's cool about biology is that there's so many different types of biology that you can study. You can study from a very big level, which is, for example, you can study ecosystems and how they work and how everything in nature works together. And that's kind of related to like climate science, for example. Or you can get down to the very small level and study something like biochemistry, which is a very, very small level of how, proteins and chemicals all interact with each other to make something wonderful.
Right.
I chose molecular biology, which is like the study of our genetics, our DNA, and how that makes us who we are, because that was one of the programs at U of T which had a co-op appended to it.
Mm.
So I definitely really, really valued the co-op, and I said I want a major that I can get a co-op experience with, and molecular bio was one of them.
Cool. And in the decision process, so how much, and you mentioned there was some influence where you kind of felt that path, but was there like a direct influence saying like your parents said thou shalt go to this, or is it more like an implicit one? Because I found that growing up that a lot of folks, they feel that their parents would have supported them in any decision, but there was kind of this pressure to like, but you know what you want to do, right? That sort of thing. Where were you on that spectrum?
That's a really, really good point. I would say a lot of it was implicit
Okay.
in that I did have other interests. I'm really, really interested in history. I
Okay.
love history and learning about it, but I didn't have any positive influences in my life. I didn't know anybody who really did a history degree other than my high school history teacher, but I
Okay.
wish I knew more people who had done that path, because then I would have been able to see that you could do that kind of a degree and have a successful, meaningful job. So I really only understood the career path of having a science degree and then ending up as a doctor, nurse, researcher. So I definitely wish that I understood more about the different types of things that you could study, but there was a lot of implicit suggestion that science is the way to go. And I know I'm not the only one. I know it's a pretty common sentiment among parents, so I totally get it.
Yeah, it's typical in different cultures, like Asian culture specifically. I've talked to folks about like the deal or no deal, which is basically doctor, engineer, accountant, lawyer. Is kind of what deal stands for.
Hmm.
So the doctors is usually on the forefront. So I can
Yeah.
imagine a lot of folks going to medicine and they automatically assume that they'll become a doctor or whatever. But there's a few other paths which we'll probably get to in other episodes. But talk to me about some of the like milestones along the way, right? So you get into university. Was that an easy process? Was your marks really good, and you had kind of your pick of everything in front of you? And then what was the journey like within university? Was it exactly what you expected, and it was kind of clear cut path, or were there a couple of turns along the way that allowed you to end up where you are right now?
Yeah, great question. So thinking back to my last couple of years of high school, I was like an averagely good student. I wasn't a shining star. I was averagely good. Nothing was exceptional about my brain. Averagely good. So like good enough to get into U of T, good enough to enroll in a co-op program. Yeah, nothing exceptional on that front. But what I do remember about, you know, being a little bit surprised about when I did go from high school into university was that all the teachers warned us that in university you're just a number and your professors
Mm.
don't know you and you'll only be known by your student number.
Ooh.
And I found that when I went to U of T Scarborough, which is a smaller campus, that was absolutely not the case.
Mm.
I was able to meet and make personal connections with so many professors. Professors knew my name. You could see people in the hallways and you'd smile at them because they'd recognize you from other classes. So I would say that that was a really defining um, and changing thing. I remember going from high school into uni, just like having those expectations shattered in a good way, in the best way possible.
That's great. But you did have some of those first year classes of like hundreds of students, like those giant lecture halls and stuff. Like biology wasn't a smaller program. It was still fairly large.
Yeah, yeah, it's one of the biggest programs, and
Right.
absolutely right. I mean, you remember the AC 223 lecture hall, which is, I don't know, seats like 500 or something like that. And you can be a nobody. You could be a nobody at university if you just show up, go to class, and then go home. Um, but it's entirely possible to make connections if you go to office hours and you put yourself a little bit more forward in order to engage. So you're right. Like you could blend in and really be lost in the crowd, but it's also very, very possible at U of T Scarborough to make a name for yourself.
Yeah, I definitely blended in. I don't think any of the professors really knew who I was.
Yeah.
And even if I go back and the professor says, I was in your class, and they're like, I don't quite remember you, but
Well,
maybe
it takes
vaguely.
two to tango, right?
100%, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't put any blame on them. It's a lot of it is my fault. But what I
hmm
want to ask is as a kid growing up in high school, were you more outgoing? Were you more introverted, shy, and did that kind of carry forward in the university experience?
Yeah. Um, Surprisingly, in high school, I genuinely thought that I was an introverted person.
Okay.
It turns out that I I guess I blended more with the folks who I met at university compared to high school.
Okay.
So that was a really interesting self-discovery point where I thought I was one way, but it turned out it was just kind of the people who were around me. And then going to university and finding people who I related to a little bit more and discovering that I was actually a really extroverted person who loved other people.
Okay.
That was a little bit interesting. So definitely had some preconceived notions that got challenged, but again, in the best way possible.
Can you describe like maybe that first time that might have happened where I mean you come in to university and you're like shy and introverted, at least that's the label you gave yourself, and then you meet these people, your tribe, your these are my peeps, that sort of thing, and then now you're kind of outgoing and you're the life of the party, that sort of thing. Is there like a defining moment within there that kind of transitioned you, or was it gradual, or something in between?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm definitely not the life of the party, but I think I do bring some energy. What I would say is that the orientation week at U of T was really, really great
Okay.
because that everybody was looking to make friends. I think everybody was in a state where if they were there, if they were at orientation, it meant that they were kind of open to making some friendships.
Mhm.
And so I definitely think back to just going up to random people and basically introducing myself. And in the first couple of weeks of uni, when I would see people who, I might have recognized them from multiple classes, again, it was really easy to introduce myself and say, hey, I saw you in chem and bio. What's your name?
Hmm.
So that was definitely something that happened very, very early on in uni for me. And again, a very nice change to be able to meet new people, because high school is, you see the same people for 4 years and there's not much changeover, but university just changes that up so completely, which is wonderful.
So it's almost like creating your own identity or whatever you wanted to be in orientation, in the sense that, well, they didn't have to know you were an introvert, so you could go up and say hi, and that's not necessarily anything that carried from your previous life as a high school student. And it could be just like the people in the program just aligned with you a little bit more. But sounds
Yeah.
interesting. So walk us through kind of the journey towards graduation, and then to your role at GSK. Like how was that? Was it straightforward? Was it pretty easy, or was it kind of nerve-wracking and challenging?
Yeah. I'll preface this because this is a comment or a question I get from a lot of folks. They ask how long I took to do my degree.
Hmm.
I took 5 years. I took a full 5 years to do my degree.
Hmm.
And there's no shame in that at all. I hear a ton of first year students saying to me that they don't want to take extra classes or they don't want to do a co-op because they're afraid that their degree is going to take more than 4 years.
Hmm.
But most people take more than 4 years to complete a degree at U of T. So right off the bat, I'll say absolutely no shame in taking a longer degree than 4 years, and I encourage everybody to do it.
Right. I think I heard a stat somewhere where the average is like 5 or 6 years, and so it's
Yeah.
even more closer to the 6 years for folks to complete it, and that's assuming that people even complete a degree, right? But
Yeah.
so definitely no shame in taking longer.
Yeah, absolutely. And I encourage it. I think it's better to take your time with your undergrad degree.
Sure.
Yeah. So, in terms of my journey, in first and second year, that was me really grinding out my academics, just trying to keep a good GPA, while also being involved in some social activities and some clubs. And first and second year, Ellie was definitely thinking that she was going to eventually do her master's degree and become a PhD researcher and have publications, etc. The spoiler alert is that that didn't happen. But that was all I knew. I knew that you could do medical school or nursing school or get your PhD and become a professor. So I thought that I didn't really see myself in medical school. So therefore, the reasonable option was to become a professor.
Sure.
Again, there's way more than just those few career paths, but that's all I knew. And then in between my second and my third year is when I started volunteering and working in a research laboratory. And that's when I realized that I really liked working in a team and I liked working alongside other people. Um, was the actual nitty gritty and day to day work associated with research pleasurable to me? Not as much.
Mm.
So that was the first kind of inkling that, maybe research is not actually my destiny.
Right.
Fast forward to third year university, and I'm thinking, now it's time for my co-op. I really want to understand what it is. What are my other options? And around that time, I had learned that there's this whole side of the universe I didn't know, which was the industry.
Mm.
And what I mean by the industry is all the companies that do things like produce medicines, produce medical devices, um, run tests, produce equipment for hospitals, etc. A whole world I didn't know about. And so I really wanted to get my feet into that world. And that's when I started a 16-month co-op term at Sanofi Pasteur. So I was at Sanofi Pasteur in their analytical research and development department, which means that I was still doing R&D, but it was in the context of vaccines research, which was
Mm-hmm.
very interesting. Finished that and I realized, oh, I like the industry. The industry is cool. I actually don't have to become a professor. Look at that. And that's when I went back to school, finished my degree, and applied for the Masters of Biotechnology program. And again, spoiler alert, I did get in, and that's what I'm finishing up right now. But I'll pause to see what questions you have about my journey so far.
Well, it's more like how does the time at GSK come in? So, well, I think it's good and eye-opening. What I took from that is really try to get experience doing what you plan on doing when you graduate, right? So that second, third year experience in research, even though it's volunteer, it was great exposure. And that aha moment is kind of like, well, if you're going to commit to this for the next 30, 40 years, you should probably try it first, right? It's like going in and buying I don't know, a giant a container full of snack food without ever having tried it, and then you try the first bite and like, oh man, I don't like this, and I just bought a giant container full of this stuff. So it's probably good to get some experience. But in regards to the journey out and in between, so you're taking your master's right now, but you mentioned you're at GSK. So how does that happen?
Yeah. I should explain that in the way that my Masters of Biotech program works. We call it MBiotech, okay?
Sure.
So how MBiotech works is that you do a rigorous 2 semesters of full course work. So you're just a student for 2 semesters. That's like the summer and the fall semester. And then you transition into your co-op term. And that's when I became an intern at GSK.
Gotcha.
And while I was an intern, I was still doing some classes for MBiotech. So I completed a 1-year internship at GSK, and I was able to actually transition from being an intern to being a permanent employee, which is where I'm at right now. And so I do work a full-time job, and I've got 1 class left to complete in my MBiotech degree. And it works together really wonderfully because my class is in the evening, so I can be my full self at work. And after work hours is when I go back into student mode, at least for a little bit, and am working towards graduating in April 2021. So the wonderful thing is the MBiotech program is built in such a way that you are expected to complete at least your 1-year internship, and then as most students do go on to either full-time permanent work or they get an extension on their contract, they're expected to keep on working and then have one or 2 classes in the evening to complete. So
Gotcha.
it works together really wonderfully, like the work and the class all meshes together.
Cool. So it's more of a function of the program itself, where you're actually working and doing some of the coursework just to finish off. So that's great.
Yeah.
What about future aspirations? So I mean, whatever you know, because I don't know how far in the future you plan. But now that you've graduated, your full-time job, that's kind of the gold standard of any student. Where like before I graduate, I have a job, yay! Like and I don't have to worry about it. But what's next? How far in the future are you thinking? Because eventually you'll be done your course, and then now you'll be kind of free and clear. Is there a PhD in the works, or is there something else, or what else are you thinking?
Yeah, certainly. That's a great question. I'm not planning to pursue my PhD because that doesn't align with, where I am right now and the goals that I have. I think a PhD is absolutely fabulous for a lot of people's goals, and I certainly encourage people to still think about that, even if they do have a full-time job. But I would say that for myself, where I do want to grow is continue to grow in the pharmaceutical industry. I would love to keep on expanding my knowledge because I realize that the more I learn, the more that there is to know.
Yeah.
Where I am in regulatory right now is that I help to get new drugs approved, and I help to expand patients' access to medicines that we already have approved. And so where I'd like to go with that is to keep on exploring how I can make a good impact on patients' lives, by thinking about things like how can we launch this product the most effectively, or how can we make sure that the greatest number of patients have access to this medicine. So definitely want to keep on exploring, keep on growing, keep on expanding my leadership. So I don't think I'm going to be doing more formal education, as in another degree, but certainly I'm a lifelong learner, and I'm very, very committed to keeping on, growing, learning, and improving my skills as I already exist in the industry that I'm in now.
That's awesome. And so thanks for sharing kind of your journey, at least at a high level, and hopefully in future episodes, we'll be able to kind of dig deeper, because I'm sure folks would be interested to, well, if I'm looking at these other areas, like how do I find out more? Because obviously you went into one area, but the industry, like medical devices and all that sort of stuff, it's huge. It's this other world that you never know.
Yeah.
And maybe some of the other thinking there. But would you have any kind of SWIKE, the stuff I wish I knew earlier, for yourself? So little Ellie, young Ellie in whatever, high school, university, or wherever it makes most sense. Like what advice would you have for your younger self, and kind of the younger selves that are listening to you right now that might be in a similar situation?
Great. In terms of stuff I wish I knew earlier, like I said, the department I work in is called regulatory, and I wish I knew earlier what it was. I really had no idea until probably the end of undergrad. I didn't know anything about it. So I wish I knew earlier what the options were that you could have as a job that were not just medical school or professor.
Cool.
I wish that tactically I was able to learn from more people who were adultier adults than I am. I consider myself like a demi-adult. Like I do know some things, but I'm still learning a lot. And so I just wish that I had asked more questions and prodded more adultier adults about their careers. Maybe I didn't know the right questions to ask, or I didn't even know who to approach.
Right.
So that's definitely something I wish I did.
Yeah, I think for me, like the book I wrote was stuff I wish I knew earlier, but the original one was what you didn't know you needed to know, but I couldn't come up with a nice acronym for that. So that's kind of that, where like, if you know the questions to ask, sometimes they're challenging to ask, but sometimes they're fairly straightforward, but sometimes you don't even know the question, right? Like
Yeah.
you didn't think to ask about regulatory, right? Are there any other things that you'd want to share with kind of the younger generation?
Be open-minded.
Okay.
You will change. I changed so much between my high school days and my university days, and that's okay. You're not betraying yourself by changing your interests. You're not betraying yourself by changing the friend groups that you're in. And you're certainly only doing yourself a favor if you keep an open mind and be committed to growth, changing your opinions with new information that comes in, and wanting to learn. So be a sponge, absorb all the knowledge that you can, but also be like water, be adaptable, and be okay with change.
Cool.
And it's weird. It's uncomfortable. Changing is weird, and admitting that you're a different person now is kind of a strange situation to find yourself in, but it's okay. We're not static.
That's great. I think that's some useful advice for those listening. And thanks for joining us on the SWIKE podcast. And hopefully we'll have you back to kind of go a little more in depth in any one of these, because I picked out a couple of interesting topics that I think would be worthwhile for some of our audience to listen to. So thanks so much, Ellie, for joining us.
Thank you so much, Lucky.
Thanks for joining us on the SWIKE Stuff I Wish I Knew Earlier, the podcast. If you like the podcast, please subscribe on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you found this podcast. And if you can give us a review, that would be very appreciated. Feel free to contact me on LinkedIn at LukiDanu, LukiDanu, and the same on most social media platforms. And I look forward to hearing from you. Thanks. Bye.